So, Christine,
Yes, Kate.
who are we canceling today?
We are canceling the tech broligarchy.
You mean like, what's his name? Big Balls? That's has everybody's social security number? Is that what we're talking about? Are we going higher? Are we shooting higher?
I mean, I'm going lower. I'm aiming right at the small balls.
I can't believe we've led this episode off talking about ball shooting, but it seems like maybe it's appropriate for where our country is going right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the times are unprecedented, but we've been here before. It's just worse.
Yeah, we're just getting fucked by, men with small balls.
Yes.
Hey everyone, I'm Caitlin Burns.
And I'm Christine Grimaldi.
And you're listening to Cancel Me Daddy,
the show where we take a closer look at all the panic around cancel culture.
With thoughtful analysis.
And verbal shitposting.
So, Christine.
Yes, Kate.
We have a new logo.
We do.
And it's amazing.
It's amazing.
I'm just so excited. I hope people don't freak out when they see it.
No, we gave people a little sneak peek in the Discord, and I think that the reaction was really positive.
Yeah, I also put it on our socials, but this will be sort of the first week that people will see the new design.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell listeners how it came to be?
Yeah, well, we have an amazing in-house artist at the Flytrap, Romy Tarico, and they designed it for us over the course of several months. We get in our little chat and give feedback about different fonts that they ran by us. And we just wanted something that felt like us. We
needed to upgrade the logo because the old official logo still had Oliver's name and picture in it. So it was time to update. And so we figured, with you coming out of the show, let's just design something brand new. And I hope everybody likes it.
I think the font is cool. The colors are cool. And I'm honored to have my name up there.
We're honored to have you.
Well, thanks.
Also, a little birdie told me that we might have a special Halloween-themed October logo, but that is not for us to spill the beans more about now.
We will unveil it at the time.
I wanted to say last week's show was so good.
I had a blast.
And this week's show is just as good, in my opinion.
It really is. I think that this week's show maybe is a touch more serious.
Yeah.
But also was a really great conversation. Like, our guest was super engaging and I think really will speak to our listeners.
Yes, I agree.
And we had Tat Bellamy-Walker, who's the program manager for digital safety training and resources at PEN America.
Yeah, we had a really good talk about social media, which of course is right in the wheelhouse of this podcast's purview. And I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, and specifically how trans people can protect themselves and also how we can all protect each other on the internet as the broligarchy is making it not as safe, not as fun as it used to be either.
They're running roughshod not only over our internet, but also over our government.
Yes. Joining us today on Cancel Me Daddy is Tat Bellamy-Walker, journalist and the program manager, digital safety training and resources at PEN America. Welcome to the show, Tat.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here today.
There has been much to do about what is happening with Meta and the proliferation of hate speech on the internet. And we wanted to talk to somebody who really understands what's happening, both from your perspective as a journalist and also from your literal job, your new job, right?
Yes.
Maybe you could bring us through exactly what these policy changes, what are they?
Yeah, so one of the policy changes is definitely, Meta is ending its third-party fact-checking program in the U.S., and then they're also relying less on automated content moderation. And then finally, Meta is weakening or loosening its hate speech or hateful conduct guidelines. So going towards the hateful conduct guidelines, most social media platforms have policies on what kind of content is and is not allowed, including policies on hate and harassment. And as private companies, they're totally like Meta is totally allowed to have these policies. But I think what our concerns are is that these new policies and these new changes specifically impact folks based on immigration, gender, and gender identity. So in Meta's revised policy, it now says, we do allow allegations of mental illness or abnormality when based on gender or sexual orientation, given political and religious discourse about transgenderism and homosexuality. So it's really telling that they chose to use, outdated and loaded terms like homosexuality and transgenderism. And, I'm also a member of the Trans Journalists Association. So seeing even a term like transgenderism, in TJA's style guide, we say that that's a term that's often used by anti-trans activists to describe transgender people. Second, they're now allowing users to compare certain ethnic groups to filth or feces, refer to women as household objects or property, call for the exclusion of gay people from certain professions. And it just goes on, claim that gay and trans people do not exist, refer to trans or non-binary, person as an int. So the fact that Meta's policy changes specifically focus on immigration, gender, and gender identity, and, definitely transgender people, suggests that the company is not actually making these updates just to promote freedom of expression, right? Instead, it's definitely exploiting the fact that trans and queer people are often used as tools to drive partisan messages. And trans and queer people are already disproportionately targeted with hate and harassment, from violent death threats and rape threats online. So these policy changes will make that abuse even worse and may drive more trans folks, as well as LGBTQ plus folks, women and immigrants, off of Meta's platform. And just as a whole, Meta's changes just really look like a blatant attempt not to protect free speech, but to appease and please the incoming administration.
And it's not like these social media companies, I'm thinking about Twitter specifically. It's not like they were these, so-called safe spaces that, these conservatives love to lambast, right? Black women in particular experience a disproportionate amount of abuse on Twitter under policies that were supposedly supposed to protect against hate speech and things like that. So it almost seems now that Twitter is X and now with these changes with Meta, it seems like an invitation almost, it's an invitation for abusive and harmful conduct.
Yeah, what we have seen is that, especially when it comes to journalists, many journalists require to have a public presence online or on social media for their work. And we see that people of color, LGBTQ plus folks, women journalists, are already, and just users in general, are already more vulnerable to harassment, hate, and threats online. So we know that and it's very likely that these policy changes will just make that worse.
Can you speak a little bit to the way that these online spaces are changing with these policy changes? The Facebook Meta. I will never get used to that, is not the first of these platforms to go all in on allowing just any sort of old abuse. Not necessarily any sort of old abuse, but particularly bigoted abuse in the name of free speech. I've already effectively left Twitter for Blue Sky. I still have a Facebook account for now. I have plans to delete it, but also a lot of local governments have their resource pages just on Facebook. They don't necessarily have a website. There's a lot of places in the country where people can only connect locally through Facebook because there simply aren't other resources. So can you speak a little bit to what these marginalized people are losing by getting chased off yet another online platform.
Yeah. So when we have, I would say, like fewer diverse voices on these platforms and in journalism more broadly, it definitely contributes to the diluting of public discourse and dialogue. Even going back towards one of the changes that, Meta ending third-party fact-checking. Fact-checking, isn't censorship, right? Some could argue that, verifying the accuracy of claims is a form of free expression. So when we lose folks that maybe want to fact check a claim or provide their opinion on what's going on in the world, when we lose those diverse voices, we're losing out on dialogue. We're losing out on productive conversations. We're losing out on voices on the platform.
Yeah, it's not so much free speech as speech for some. It's speech for a very select, privileged some.
Yeah, you can't have free speech if every time you log on, you're getting screamed at and called mentally ill or whatever other horrible things that people are allowed to say. It's, you don't have freedom of speech if you feel like you're being bullied into silence.
I only experienced a fraction of that when Twitter was Twitter. If you go back to 2020, you can find the headline "Feminist Crank Run Off Twitter" on the Washington Examiner. But I just really had to lock my Twitter down so I can make dinner without like death threats. I mean, I just had to do it. But yeah, like it scared the shit out of me. And that was, as a cis white woman in 2020, I feel like we have come like decades since 2020, and not in a good way, like a really regressive way.
Yeah. And, you mentioned your experience with online abuse. I mean, I've experienced online abuse too. I remember it started back in 2020. So for a backstory, I had been covering race and LGBTQ plus issues for many years. And back in 2020, I wrote a personal essay on gender affirming care for Business Insider. And I experienced a great deal of online abuse for that. And then it just started to escalate. As I continued to, write stories about LGBTQ plus issues, like in 2021, like just a year later, I remember I received a couple of angry voicemails from a source, and then the source confronted me in person. And it was like this very intense incident, like with my friends by my side at a pride parade. And I was just thinking to myself, how did this source find me? And then just a year or so later, I was again writing a story about the local response to anti-drag legislation. This was back when I, was the communities reporter at the Seattle Times. I was writing about like the local response to national anti-drag legislation. And after that story, I experienced an overwhelming amount of, I would say, like just hate speech targeting me for both being Black and trans, just slurs, just a lot of wildness in like the emails. But it just kept escalating. I ended up writing a tweet about not feeling heard and seen in the journalism industry as a Black trans journalist. And then the tweet was screenshotted by a more conservative Facebook page. And then a story was written about me in the Blaze, which ended up using the story back from 2020 that I wrote about gender affirming care. And it was just a wild sort of time for me.
Yeah, I can relate to at least some of that. I mean, I don't get harassed for my race, but certainly covering trans issues for almost 10 years now. I've been through it, and it's not always like arch conservatives that have harassed me. I have gotten a lot of unfair harassment from a lot of different corners of the internet. And what's particularly interesting to me about Meta, I don't use Instagram. I always used to joke that I have a face for podcasting, not Instagram, which is why I'm here and not posting selfies from some beach right now. So my only meta product, quote unquote, that I've ever used was Facebook. And my running joke for like the last 2 years, I've had my column for MSNBC, and almost every time I write about trans issues for MSNBC, I get I get direct messages on Facebook through Facebook Messenger from like boomer readers. And they vary. Like every once in a while I'll get like an older trans person who's like, "Oh my God, I didn't know there were any trans journalists." And then I'll get, 10 emails from angry boomer guys going, "You're gonna rot in hell," and this, that, and the other thing. And then one time I wrote about growing up Catholic and trans, and I had a bunch of people trying to convert me to their church on Facebook Messenger. But that's been my like limited experience with Facebook recently, I would say. And yet I still can't necessarily 100% let it go. Like I found a legitimate use the other day. I am creating a personal website for myself, which is something I should have done long ago. And I needed a headshot for it. And somebody that I went to high school with, who I'm only in contact with on Facebook, is a professional photographer. So I was like, oh, I actually found a legitimate use for the first time in like 5 years for my Facebook. And it made me sort of put a pause on my plans to delete my account. But I think one of the points that I wanted to make is that we had these anti-hate speech policies before with Facebook, and then they lifted them. But the problem of harassment of trans people, of Black people, of disabled people, any marginalized community on Facebook existed before they had lifted these restrictions even.
Yes.
Like I know that some of the stories that get, like journalistic stories that get the most exposure on Facebook and most reads or hits or however you want to measure it, are like anti-trans articles that get people very upset about athletes or, children's healthcare, things like that. Like why, in your mind, did they just choose to go in the other way? Are they giving up?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it's like important to note that Meta has weakened its hateful conduct or hate speech policies. It's not like completely lifted. It's just, it's just dramatically weakened from the former policies. Yeah. So I think that these changes really reveal that Meta is not or less interested in freedom of expression as a principle. But I really feel like it's more about appeasing the incoming administration or the new administration from just some of the changes that we see, specifically, when it's based on, gender identity, immigration. So that's what I'm seeing.
Well, and we talked before the interview today about kind of high risk beats, which is something that, you and Kate kind of just discussed about covering LGBTQ issues and experiencing hate for that. But you're also getting hate for being, trans yourselves. So do you see, is that a distinction without a difference when it comes to this kind of hate speech, high risk beats versus high risk individuals or groups? Is there a way to protect, one, both?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say that generally all beats carry a level of risk, and you can experience online abuse or harassment on any beat. But definitely in our trainings, what I found is that reporters that have a beat on, say, immigration or diversity and inclusion, race and equity, communities, extremism, disinformation, they often, in our trainings, do talk about a heightened level or disproportionate level of abuse that they are experiencing. And then it feels even doubly so when the reporter that's covering race and equity is a person of color, or maybe it's someone who is a woman covering gender. So I have seen that folks that do cover beats that focus on identity or extremism and disinformation tend to experience um, a lot of like targeted like abuse or targeted like hate speech.
Yeah.
And because we are talking about the specific tactic of online abuse, like hateful speech, I think it's also important for us to have a shared language around what online abuse is. So at Penn, we describe online abuse as the repeated or severe targeting of an individual or group online through harmful behaviors. And we use the word repeated to point to the volume or the amount of abuse you are receiving. So, for example, that can mean someone flooding your cell phone or your email with so much spam that you can't use it anymore. But it can also be severe, right? So, to show that this could be just one incident that can have very serious consequences. For example, if you've been doxxed and someone posts your home address and threatens you. And so, from this, right, we have different tactics, and there's various tactics, but one of those tactics that we're of course speaking about today is hateful speech. And we see that as speech that targets someone's identity. For example, their race, ethnicity, or gender. And as I had mentioned like earlier about how on the communities beat, that was a high risk beat for me, right? Where I was covering people of marginalized backgrounds. I'm a person with intersectional identities that put me at a high risk for experiencing hate speech.
And what kind of work are you doing at Penn to try to teach people how to protect themselves or implement policies or tactics that may help people kind of sorry if this question went off the rails, and just how can we help people? Like, how can we help everyday people who may be experiencing harassment and share these marginalized identities? And then how can we help journalists too, who, again, share these identities or have these high risk beats that you were talking about?
That's a great question. So I would recommend just some simple digital security 101 tips, that I have. It's like, practicing password hygiene. So it's really important to use long, complex passwords that are at least 16 plus characters and unique to each of your, yeah, and that are unique to each of your accounts. So some examples could be maybe you can use, we recommend like using like phrases to your favorite song or lines from, your favorite poem. So using long, complex passwords unique to each of your accounts. And because you're having these passwords, unique passwords to several accounts, it can be easier to use a password manager. Use a password manager to save this information. It doesn't all have to be up in your head. And then another recommendation we have is to, and this can, anyone can use this, not just for journalists, is to use two-factor authentication on as many devices as possible. So 2FA, that requires you to provide a PIN to prove you are the individual logging into an account. So one method or one way to do this is to use like an authenticator app. So an authenticator app generates a code for you, and you must use that code before it expires to be able to log into your account to prove you are the individual logging into that account. And no matter what method you use for 2FA, because there are several different ways that you could use 2FA, it's really important to make sure that you save your backup code somewhere safe, just in case you lose your device or if it's stolen. But some other ways that you can protect yourself on online is to remove personal information from your social media accounts. So that can mean, removing your birth date, your address, turning off your location in your privacy settings, and maybe even investing in some data scrubbing services like Delete Me, Canary, or Optory. That could also be very helpful in keeping yourself safe online. And while we can't, I think it's also important to note that, we can't prevent online abuse, but we can make it harder, for people to get to us, online.
A lot of these steps sound like ways to prevent escalation. Hate speech can lead to doxing, but if your information isn't online or isn't easily found, because you use delete me and you are very careful with your operational security and your infosec, then it's harder for them to dox you. So I think my question is do you or Penn have any advice for people who begin experiencing a mass harassment campaign? Whether that be a journalist or just an everyday person who maybe tweeted the wrong thing, because particularly for trans people, I know that sometimes online is the only place where you can truly exist as yourself. So I always bristle at these people who are like, well, just log off or just try to block everybody or just lock down your account or like, just try to ignore it. Like, I'm wondering if there's anything else that people can add to their sort of toolkit when they find themselves under a mass harassment campaign.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And some other ideas that I have is that, newsroom leaders have a responsibility to support staff and freelancers that are experiencing online abuse or, abuse offline for their work. So some advice that I feel would be helpful in that situation, like if you're experiencing this mass harassment campaign, I would say is to generally, if you're like a newsroom leader, make space to discuss safety and harassment during like all staff meetings, weekly or other regular check-ins with reporters. It could also be helpful to ask if you could help them monitor their mentions or report abusive content. Also, you might want to involve company physical security and or like internal like cybersecurity teams to provide support. So maybe they could help if, you get a death threat, or they could help strengthen your digital security and your privacy settings on email. Some other suggestions that I have is that if you're experiencing a hate campaign or so online, if you're a newsroom leader, you might want to consider, how does your newsroom moderate comments on stories? And do you have like a visible content moderation policy spelling out like what kind of commentary is unwelcome? You might also want to think, do you use automated tools or are you using human moderators to filter and review, these hateful comments that your reporters are getting or that staff members are getting under stories or just in general? And you might also consider private or public statement of support for that person being impacted, provided that that individual would be comfortable with that and would want that. So those are some of the ideas that I have based on my work with folks. I guess, well, actually, there's only one other one. If you do offer any kind of subsidized like mental health care, we definitely recommend reminding your reporters that they have access to those resources, because when you are experiencing a large like hate campaign, that will have an impact on your mental health and how you show up in the newsroom. And it's really important to make sure to remind reporters that they have access to mental health care, in-house counseling, or some form of peer support.
I wanted to add, actually, because there's something that I've done that you didn't mention, if you don't mind. And that is I worked with the MSNBC social team. The first couple of articles that I wrote for them, I did get quite a bit of harassment from just their tagging me into their social media posts. So I worked with them and I said, you know what, please don't tag me in any of these tweets of my articles. You can say my name, that's fine. Like, Caitlin Burns wrote this, but don't use my actual handle with a link to it. And that did quite a bit. First of all, it took me out of the replies and the tags of anybody responding. Mm-hmm. And also it introduced another step. So if somebody wanted to harass me personally, they had to step back and then search for my handle as well. So I think if you're covering highly controversial issues, that's another way to add just an extra layer of protection for yourself.
Yeah. And that kind of brings me to newsroom leaders considering maybe they can consider revising their newsroom social media policy, right? To ensure that it acknowledges online harassment and clarifies just how journalists are expected to navigate it, right? How you mentioned, speaking to MSNBC about removing the tags, and how they and how folks can seek support within the newsroom, whether they are freelancers or staffers. So also revising your newsroom social media policy is also important.
Kate, that sounds like a real net benefit. I'm thinking though, did that impact, followers that you could have gotten, like people that would have, come and like uplifted your platform? Do you think that is an impact too?
Yeah, it was definitely a trade-off. Because, MSNBC has a massive platform. Although I could be wrong, but I think I have more followers than their Blue Sky account. Not that I'm flexing.
Hey.
Yeah, I do have more followers than their Blue Sky account. That's pretty funny.
Maybe you shouldn't tag them. You can
Maybe
spell
I
it
should
out.
tag them, yeah.
MSNBC. Yeah. It just sucks so that's like a double-edged sword you have to navigate. And Tat, what you were saying before really like struck a chord with me, thinking about like how newsrooms can support people, because I think the way I phrase my question is how I'm feeling these days. Like, right. Like, how can we protect ourselves? And so much of it feels individualistic, but we're not alone, right? If we are journalists, we do have structural supports that really need to be working for us and step up for us. And if we're just kind of everyday people who, may identify with a marginalized group, like there are maybe things that we can do collectively as well. Like I remember when I sent off the Amy Coney Barrett tweet, which was correct in 2020, I think friend of the podcast, Talia Lavin, I think I reached out to her because I had never been through anything like this before. And she had advised having somebody like check your social media for you so that like you're not the person who keeps checking on it. So you can maybe like tag in or tap in rather like a friend or a colleague or someone that can monitor threats without, feeling like you are constantly under threat by being glued to whatever social media platform this is evolving over.
Yeah, that is actually one of the strategies that we mentioned to folks experiencing online abuse. If you're a peer and you see someone, one of your friends or so experiencing online abuse, offer to monitor their mentions, right? So that, they don't have to. And then, if you do decide to monitor their mentions, or if you're going to step up to defend someone publicly that's experiencing online abuse, make sure that your accounts are secure too, because they might also go after you too. So that's also important. I would also say if you see someone experiencing online abuse, report the content, right? Report the content, that violates platforms' policies, vigilante reporting, So that's also important. Check in on the person. You can also pair up with someone and tighten their settings like across different platforms. So that's also an option, is to help that person build and improve their digital security. Another step is to establish a supportive cyber community, right? So you might want to create like a rapid response team. So that's like a trusted group of like 4 to 5 or 5 to 6 people. And right, that's someone that can monitor your social media accounts, but that's someone that if you're doxxed, maybe you could stay at their house, right? So that's like your rapid response team, right? Or you can, call on your wider cyber community for support. You can ask someone to like be a guest moderator or so on your comment section. So that's also some tips or some ways that folks can step in to support folks facing online abuse when they see it.
Is it worth it to keep reporting these comments as violations of policy, even though the policies have changed?
That's a great question. Yes, it is. Because one thing that is important is that it provides data to the platforms on how much abuse is happening. So it is important in terms of like, getting data about the hate that is happening on these platforms, as well as that, it might, depending on, the specific platforms or the specific community guidelines, reporting a post, might get that post removed. It's not something guaranteed, but, we often report posts in a way to help get the post removed, especially if it violates the platform's community guidelines. But anyway, it does still provide that data.
And you had mentioned something when we spoke earlier about counter speech.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that we can do as individuals or tap in, maybe a member of our like rapid response team, which I love that idea, or friends or whatnot. Does it actually help try to correct like whatever narrative is unfolding?
That's a great question. So it's often, I say counter speech, but it's often, you might hear it more commonly as like, should I feed or not feed the trolls? Or should I reply to trolls or so?
Mm.
So whether you should or should not reply to trolls or practice counter speech is definitely a personal decision. I think it's really important for me to be clear about what we mean by engaging with trolls or practicing counter speech. I don't want for folks to abuse the abuser or perpetuate any sort of cycle of abuse. I just want to make that clear.
Yeah.
I do, recommend doing a risk assessment before deciding to practice counter speech. So you may choose not to engage or not to practice counter speech because it could increase your risk of increase the harassment you're already facing, or maybe you're being targeted online by a bot army or a troll army, and it doesn't make sense to practice counter speech with a bunch of computers. It might not make sense to do that. You might also not be ready, for the stress and psychological impact of confrontation if you're already overwhelmed by the amount of abuse that you're experiencing. Also, depending on how you respond, that might also violate your employer's social media policy or protocols. That being said, I do want to say that some journalists and folks online do feel really empowered when they respond to trolls or when they use counter speech to defend themselves and their work. So you might choose to respond because you want to correct a false narrative about you online. You want to fact check false claims, or you want to condemn hate and bigotry. So, for example, some folks might screenshot a harmful tweet and then write a statement on the post about what makes this message harmful. And I say for folks to screenshot, right, but not retweet, because retweeting would mean that you're making that post more popular on the platform. But yeah, practicing and engaging in counter speech is definitely a personal decision. And I do want to let folks know that it does come with some risks. And you may choose not to engage for various reasons, as I had mentioned before, between the toll of confrontation. Maybe you don't want to, doesn't make sense to write a post to a bunch of computers that are writing you, or, it's real. Or
I know it's I feel like it's changed so much in just a few years.
Yeah. But then again, you might want to correct a false narrative or fact check something false. That is a false claim online. So it's definitely a personal decision, but I definitely recommend doing a risk assessment before engaging with or practicing counter speech.
Where can listeners find more resources from Penn, and where can they go to follow you and your work?
I recommend everyone check out our online harassment field manual, where we provide tips on how to defend yourself against online abuse. We also have our online abuse defense program, where we do trainings with journalists and writers to help protect themselves. So we have our, online abuse self-defense trainings. We also have trainings with the Freedom of the Press Foundation called anti-hacking, like anti-doxing workshop. So yeah, like I would love for folks to get in touch with us to see how we can, help them stay safe online. And folks can reach me on Twitter at Bell_TATI, or you can reach me via email and too.
Great. Thank you so much. This
Yeah,
was such an informative conversation.
Oh, you're welcome, of course.
All right, Christine, we don't have out of context cancellations this week, so what do you got for your Ombudsman's Mom Corner?
Oh, we're going to talk about a piece from a writer I know named Caitlin Burns.
I heard she is atrocious.
No, she's amazing. She's the best reporter you've ever heard of.
And which piece is this? I've written so many recently.
Yep. Yes, and you've talked about that too. In your piece for the Handbasket, right?
That's true. Yeah, Marissa Cavas's publication.
Yeah, check that one out too. This is for Kate's Patreon. The New York Times editorial board's shameless pro-trans stance.
Yes, that one. I read their editorial board op-ed about Trump attacking trans people on multiple fronts and pearl clutching and all of this, and I'm like, bitch. I got really, really mad, actually. And sometimes when you get mad, you just have to sit down and write your feelings.
a rage rate, if you will.
Yeah, but basically, like, outside of the military ban, there's not a single thing that Trump is currently doing that hasn't already been full-throatedly endorsed by both the New York Times News Division and the opinion page. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't going to let them get off that easy.
Yeah. I mean, the trans military ban is also terrible. And I feel like they give disproportionate or they put disproportionate attention on it and kind of like downplay all of the other terrible executive orders that have been issued.
We're very quickly coming to a point where, okay, so I'm gonna like bring it back to basics here for a second.
Yes.
In the history of the gay rights movement, there was one central struggle to the movement, and it was, should we go for non-discrimination laws or should we go for marriage? They didn't feel like they had the resources to get both, and they had to make a decision. Mm-hmm. And the marriage position was fundamentally the more conservative one. And that's why you have states today that don't have equal protection under the law for LGBT couples, right? Mm-hmm. And I feel like what we're getting now, and what the New York Times was trying to do with their editorial, was to position trans military service as the gay marriage to stand in opposition to all of the other things, trans athletes, gender affirming care for youth, trans people in prisons, the fucking passport debate, which is just
beyond,
is the scariest part about all of it. I mean, people have had to cancel their overseas trips, which, might seem like a first world problem, but also like, if a government is restricting a minority from leaving the country, that usually means that they don't have good intentions in the future for them.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this with the abortion bans and perhaps restrictions on travel there. So anytime the government is restricting your movement, it is a huge problem.
Right. So I feel like the Times editorial board is trying to position and they were a little bit more firm against the passport stuff. But even then, their previous coverage calls into doubt the existence of trans women as women, trans men as men. Mm-hmm. So even that coverage agrees with the passport policy that we now have in this country. But it feels like they're trying to turn passports and military service into the gay marriage, to the more extreme, quote unquote, policies that maybe some of the Times higher ups find disagreement with in the trans rights argument. And I really want us to be careful not to settle for that.
Yeah, I think that's a really smart and insightful analysis that you won't get anywhere else. I mean, positioning or the Times rather, trying to position this as like the conservative issue. Like, oh, well, these people, like these trans people are willing to put their lives on the line. So like we should stand by them. Like that's not good enough. Like we should stand by them because like they're humans, like they're fundamentally like.
Yeah, I would like more than just the right to die for our imperialist instinct.
Yes, you said it more concisely. Yeah, that. It's funny. I did try to explain because I think that you and I must have had this conversation once, and I like what fun birthday party conversation a couple years ago. I tried explaining like the more conservative position being like the gay marriage position versus the equal rights that you were talking about to a cis gay man at my friend's birthday party, and he just looked at me kind of appalled. So maybe it was not like light birthday conversation. I was like, no, but like I'm trying to like no. And I get that too, because like I'm not a gay person trying to explain this either. So
right.
But yeah, that was like a huge strategic, I don't know. Do you think it was a misstep? Do you think it was an oversight?
On the New York Times part?
I mean, like the fundamentalness of it all. Going with gay marriage as opposed to, yeah. I mean, the New York Times stepped in its own shit. So,
right.
And do you see that this is becoming kind of like a strategy, like beyond the Times? Do you see like more of this, like, well, trans military service is something we must protect more than anything else?
I don't know if I would call it a misstep, but I do think it's interesting that everybody considered the quote unquote gay debate to be over when like gay marriage, like the gay marriage decision came down from the Supreme Court, given that we had, I don't know how many states that like gay people had no civil rights in. Yeah. Like even at the time, like you could get married, you could be a gay man in Alabama and get married. But if you put a picture of a wedding picture of the two of you on your desk, you could be fired the next day. But everybody like rushed to say, "Oh, the fight for gay rights is over. Like gay people won," and it's like, well, gay people are still second class citizens in a lot of this country. So I don't know that it was necessarily a misstep to focus on the marriage debate. I think it was a misstep to stop at the marriage debate.
Yeah, like a both and as opposed to an either or.
Like the rich blue state, liberal gay guys who have state level protections, but maybe didn't have the right to have their marriage recognized in all 50 states. I think they won and they kind of lost interest and they stopped funding the movement. And I think it's led directly to today where you have conservatives all out attacking trans people. We don't necessarily have the resources to fight back. I mean, the Human Rights Campaign just the other day cut 20% of their staff, multiple VPs. They cut their entire DEI team. An absolute bloodbath of layoffs over there. I think conservatives are going to make another run at gay rights once they're done with us. Like I don't see the Obergefell ruling holding up over the long term if we continue on our current trajectory. So to settle again for a more conservative rights option on trans rights like we did with gay rights feels like it would be a mistake.
And it's that pivoting to the center again that, won us the election in November.
Yeah, I mean, it's been shown in several countries, not just ours, that pivoting to the center usually loses the left-leaning party the election.
Yeah.
I think we need to cut that out. And we've been writing a little bit about that in this week's Sunday Patreon column. So if you want to see that, subscribe to my personal Patreon, which I don't usually promote on here.
I think you should, though, because your column last week was really good. And I think that you have a lot of smart things to say that are not being covered.
Yeah, but also I want people to subscribe to our podcast.
Yes, subscribe to yeah, maybe that's another like and both, not either or.
Yeah. It feels weird having two different Patreons. But they very much need to be separated for multiple reasons. But I do feel bad that my personal one seems to get more attention.
Like and subscribe to us too with our new logo.
Yes. Patreon.com/CancelMeDaddy. You get early access to all our episodes. You can get access to our Discord channel. And you also get ad-free versions of the podcast at any level. So good stuff. But yeah, more to come on that front. I'm really excited about having the Sunday column, although I will miss having my free weekends where I never did any writing on the weekends. But, such is the reality we live in.
Indeed. Well, thank you for coming on your Ombudsman's Corner. I think that you are a really smart voice in this coverage that we have right now.
Thank you. We just plugged the Patreon, but also I wanted to mention that if you're interested in sponsoring Cancel Me Daddy, please contact sponsors at multitude.productions as well. That's another way to support the show.
And we are also going to shout out the final 15 of the Flytrap's Big Dad Energy Kickstarter supporters.
Yes, so these are folks who contributed to the Flytrap Kickstarter, and the reward was getting a shout out on the show. And this should be the last group of listeners that we have. Mm-hmm. So I'll get it started. Thank you, Robin G.
And Red Robot 71.
Danielle D.
Bronto Bryn.
Phil S.
Heather Laresh.
Sophia Resnick.
Hey, Sophia.
Former colleague of both of ours, by the way.
It's amazing. Tom.
Grace Robertson, one of my favorite people on the internet, by the way.
Oh, I have to follow Grace.
Yeah.
And Alice.
And Andy Zeisler.
Anna Kornblue.
We have Nop. Is it Nop?
Hi, Nop.
Nope. Nop. We can go with Nop.
We're going to go with Nop, and thank you very much.
And thank you, yes, and apologies.
Therese and Daniel in Providence.
And Alicia from the Bahamas.
Thank you all very much. We mean it.
Yeah, so far so good with the Flytrap, who's also a proud partner of this podcast. Mm-hmm. And we couldn't have done it without you all supporting our Kickstarter. Cancel Me Daddy is a Flytrap media production, and today's show was made by me, Caitlin Burns, my incredible co-host Christine Grimaldi, and our amazing editor Maria Paleologos.
Dee Peterschmidt made our theme song, and Romy Tirico designed our graphics. Ads by Multitude Productions.
Our show is made possible by the incredible cancelers supporting our work, especially the members of our Canceler Hall of Fame with the great power to cancel all of their enemies. Meg.
We appreciate your support.
Happy canceling.